What did A Song of Ice and Fire look like from Tywin Lannister's perspective? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher, then this is the place for you. Welcome. This is a sort of follow-up to a previous video looking at Tywin's early life and plan to boost House Lannister's fortunes from the relatively lowly status they were at when he was a child. And by the start of A Song of Ice and Fire, Tywin had achieved a lot. The Lannisters were the second most powerful family in the Seven Kingdoms, ostensibly behind only the royal family themselves. But of course, that still left one rung to climb. The court in King's Landing was full of Lannisters: Cersei, Jaime, Lancel, Tyrek, and Lannister loyalists: Ilyn Payne, Pycelle, Boros Blount, Meryn Trant, and so on. But Tywin himself stayed in Casterly Rock, as he had done for most of the last 2 decades. As was his way, he was waiting for the right moment to arise, and then he would act decisively. The moment arrived when Catelyn Stark captured Tyrion at the inn at the crossroads. Things had been tense before then, but this was a direct attack on Lannister honour. Tywin may not have loved Tyrion, but he couldn't allow a Lannister to be captured like that without being seen to respond forcibly. And Tywin probably found out very quickly. Even as he was being captured, Tyrion thinks to himself that the free rider with the gold coin in his pocket would fly to Casterly Rock like an arrow. If not him, then someone else. Riders would be after them within the day. Birds would take wing, and surely one of the Riverlords would want to curry favour with his father enough to take a hand. Catelyn gives them the slip, but Tywin does hear quickly and responds quickly. Not by obviously going to war, but by sending the Mountain and some men dressed as brigands to pillage their way through the Riverlands. There was some deniability there, but still everyone knew who was behind it. The Mountain is not exactly easily mistaken for someone else. Remember, at this time, Robert Baratheon was still alive and well, and Ned Stark, Hand of the King. Sending a Lannister army into the field then would have been tantamount to starting a civil war. And Tywin actually wasn't after a war just then. He was aiming to draw out Ned Stark. He rightly judged that Ned would want to personally lead a party out to confront the Mountain. This was, after all, an attack on his wife's homeland and the king's peace. Tywin thought he could capture Ned and swap him for Tyrion. The problem was that he didn't tell anyone in King's Landing this plan, presumably because he had to keep up that plausible deniability, and sending a raven was a bit risky. So when Jaime hears about Tyrion, he angrily confronts Ned on the streets of King's Landing, leading to Ned's injury. Jaime realised that attacking the Hand of the King was not a good look for a member of the King's Guard, so he rode off to the safety of Casterly Rock then, by which point the die was cast. Tywin then starts to amass a couple of armies, while Ned is out injured for a week, and King Robert decides that it's a good time to go on a long hunting trip. Finally, news arrives that the king is dead, and Ned has been imprisoned, and then finally that Robb has called to the banners and is marching south. That seems to have been the final prompt for Tywin. Jaime leads an army out of the Westerlands a week later, winning the battle at the Golden Tooth, then pushing on to Riverrun, defeating Edmure on the field and besieging the castle. Meanwhile, Tywin himself, with Kevan, took out 2 other key Riverlands castles, Raventree Hall and Harrenhal. He ended up camped around the inn at the crossroads. Why there? Well, it was a great position to head anywhere on good roads. King's Landing lay south on the King's Road, the Vale of Arryn east, Winterfell north, and Riverrun west. He could react quickly to a fast-moving situation. And why attack the Riverlands at all? Well, because it was a key ally of the North, who at the time were the only real opponents in this war. Renly and Stannis hadn't yet declared themselves, though Tywin was wary of potential attacks from either, and because it joined up his forces across the middle of Westeros, from Casterly Rock to King's Landing. Tyrion arrived at that point with his hill tribes, just in time for Tywin to make his next move. He was delighted to hear that the Starks were now moving south down the King's Road. He would bring his army up to meet them. The battle itself, the Battle of the Green Fork, shows us Tywin's strategic mind at work, and also some of where his blind spots are. He comes up with a plan to place the hill tribesmen on the left of his army, assuming that they will break easily, and further assuming that Robb, inexperienced as he is, will overcommit his forces there and leave himself exposed to being encircled or outflanked. As he says, "The Stark boy is a child. No doubt he likes the sound of war horns well enough, and the sight of his banners fluttering in the wind, but in the end it comes down to butcher's work. I doubt he has the stomach for it. As it turns out, the hill tribesmen do not break, and it isn't Robb in charge of that army anyway. It is Roose Bolton, a much more cautious general. Tywin gets the victory, but it is far from decisive, and soon after that he learns that Robb has outsmarted him too, sending a force over the Twins, defeating Jaime's army at the Whispering Wood, and breaking the siege of Riverrun. More bad news followed. Jaime is captured, Ned, a key bargaining chip, has been beheaded, and Sir Barristan Selmy cast out of the Kingsguard. Renly has also now declared himself king and allied himself with the powerful Tyrells. Tywin now has a host of issues to turn his attention to. He would ideally have wanted to take control in King's Landing as Hand of the King, to stop Cersei from doing anything else rash, and to prepare its defences in case Stannis or Renly do attack there. But if he did, he would be giving up all the land he had claimed in the Riverlands, giving Robb a strong grip on the centre of the continent. If he headed west to deal with Robb's army at Riverrun, he left the King's Road open for Roose to head down to King's Landing with his army of Northerners. If he stayed still, he ran the risk of being caught in a not particularly defendable position, and caught between 2 or even 3 armies. So he sent Tyrion to King's Landing to sort that mess out. We don't have time here for a full breakdown of Tywin's relationship with Tyrion, but this at least shows that he recognises his intelligence and political acumen. It is pure pragmatic expediency. As he says to Tyrion later, there is a tool for every task, and a task for every tool. Tyrion was clearly the tool for that particular task. Tywin himself, with his army, would move the short distance to Harrenhal. It may not be in the best of repair or have the best of reputations, but it was a large, strong castle close enough to his original position to allow him to react to whichever threat presented itself next, and in particular, it guarded the northern approach to King's Landing. He further sends the Mountain, Amory Lorch and Vargo Hoat to double down on their pillaging of the Riverlands. It would cause damage to his opponents and potentially draw Robb and Edmure out to try to defend their bannermen. Bad news, however, keeps coming as Tywin stays at Harrenhal. Stannis declares himself and spreads the story about Jaime and Cersei. Beric Dondarrion refuses to die, despite seemingly being killed several times, and Robb takes a fast-moving part of his army into the Westerlands, destroying a new Lannister army being trained and winning several battles. Tywin's apparent inactivity here frustrates many on his side, and on Robb's. Robb had hoped to draw Tywin out by his raids in the Westerlands. But although it happens very much off-page, it seems that this is when Tywin starts his alternative approach to winning the war, through diplomacy rather than on the field of battle. Later, when Tyrion comes to see him in the Tower of the Hand in King's Landing, we get this exchange. Tywin starts, "Did you come here just to complain of your bedchamber and to make your lame japes? I have important letters to finish." Important letters, to be sure. Some battles are won with swords and spears, others with quills and ravens. We have to join up a lot of dots, but there are 3 broad areas where this diplomatic push works. First, with the marriage of Robb Stark to Jane Westerling. It seems that Tywin came to a deal with Lady Sybil Spicer, Jane's mother, to make it happen. We learn some of the details about this much later after Robb's death, when Jaime questions Jane and Sybil about whether Jane might be pregnant. "She is not," said Lady Sybil, as her daughter struggled to escape. "I made certain of that, as your Lord Father bid me." Jaime nodded. Tywin Lannister was not a man to overlook such details. "Unhand the girl," he said. "I'm done with her for now." As Jane fled sobbing down the stairs, he considered her mother. "House Westerling has its pardon, and your brother Rolf has been made Lord of Castamere. What else would you have of us?" "Your Lord Father promised me worthy marriages for Jane and her younger sister. Lords or heirs, he swore to me, not younger sons nor household knights. Mention was made of a match for my son as well, a bride from Casterly Rock. Your Lord Father said that Rhaenald should have joy of him, if all went as we hoped. Even from the grave, Lord Tywin's dead hand moves us all," thinks Jaime. So Tywin bribed House Westerling with a new lordship and some advantageous marriages. How did Sybil Spicer make Jane and Robb fall in love? Well, I covered that in another video, but suffice to say here that I think magic and love potions were involved. The result of that was Robb being forced to abandon his attacks on the Westerlands and charge back to Riverrun, then the Twins, to attempt to patch up his rocky alliance with the Freys. Which brings us to the second focus of Tywin's politicking, Walder Frey. He needed to be persuaded to dispose of Robb through what became known as the Red Wedding. It seems that Walder had long admired Tywin, was not averse to switching sides for political advantage, and relished hard negotiated deals, like the one he'd struck with Robb and Cat earlier in the story. We can easily imagine quite a drawn-out negotiation here, perhaps started by Tywin allowing the Frey prisoners he held in Harrenhal to be ransomed back. But out of all this, Walder got a lot. Not just a pardon and protection for House Frey from the Lannisters, but also Aemon Frey would be made Lord of Riverrun. Lancel Lannister would be made Lord of Darry and made to marry a Frey. Davon Lannister was also to marry a Frey, and Joy Hill, a Lannister bastard daughter, would marry one of Walder's bastard sons. The third focus of this diplomacy was Roose Bolton, who would be made new Warden of the North. Again, we don't know exactly when this started, certainly not with any commitment from Roose before the Battle of the Blackwater, but we can see evidence of it developing. In particular, when Jaime is at Harrenhal and Vargo Hoat has cut off his hand, Roose decides to send him on to Tywin with an escort of Bolton men, rather than back to Robb, his king, but he is very concerned that Tywin might think that he was responsible. Roose doesn't spell it out, but Jaime understands what Roose is saying. He wants to stay on the right side of Tywin Lannister. Vargo Hoat's crime is mine, says Roose, or may seem so in your father's eyes, and therein lies my small difficulty. He gazed at Jaime, his pale eyes unblinking, expectant, chill. I see, thinks Jaime. You want me to absolve you of blame, to tell my father that this stump is no work of yours. Jaime laughed. Later, Roose sends a third of his army, all Stark loyalists, to their deaths at Duskendale in an apparent move to show his new loyalties. And out of it all, the Boltons got control of the north. So that is Tywin's strategy for dealing with Robb Stark and the Riverlands. The net gain for him is not just elimination of an enemy, but also placing allies and politically advantageous marriages throughout the Riverlands and the north. But as I said, that diplomacy by Raven took place over several months, culminating in the Red Wedding. Tywin may have kept his hands clean there, but he was very much a part of it. It wouldn't have happened without his involvement. Back in Harrenhal, he does finally make a move west when word reaches him of Renly's death. Judging that Stannis would now be kept busy for a while, finishing off the siege of Storm's End and trying to merge his and Renly's armies, he heads off to tackle Robb's army, who were at that point still proving a problem in the Westerlands. Not that he gets far. Edmure marches out of Riverrun to stop him crossing the Red Fork River, which he does. Fortuitously for Tywin, this allows news to reach him quicker that Stannis had taken Storm's End quicker than expected, and was preparing to sail for King's Landing very soon. Tywin was needed back there. He marches his army back to the headwaters of the Blackwater Rush, where he joins forces with the Tyrells, newly signed up to his side. Although Tywin was surely involved here, this was largely done at Tyrion's instigation and through Littlefinger as intermediary, offering Joffrey as husband to Margaery. The newly joint army then heads downriver, arriving at King's Landing just in time to break Stannis' attacking force. The Chain and Wildfire had done a great job in slowing the assault, but the arrival of the Lannister and Tyrell army was the thing that really turned the tide of the battle. Tywin then takes up his office again as Hand of the King and carries on with his plotting. And we should pause briefly to acknowledge here that Tywin had turned the tide of that war with astonishing efficiency and brutality. After the Red Wedding, the threat from the north was over. Stannis had also retreated to Dragonstone, his tail between his legs, a diminished threat. Renly was dead, and the Greyjoys were focusing their attentions far from King's Landing. It wasn't all down to him, but it must have felt like a huge victory. Finally, he had achieved his ambition to make the Lannisters the most powerful family in the Seven Kingdoms. His grandson was the king. He was the Hand, and there was no serious opposition to their rule. Of course, hubris can be a terrible thing. The next few months show Tywin trying to cement Lannister rule. Tyrion is made Master of Coin, another role he is well suited to, but Tyrion sees it as an insulting demotion. Tyrion is also married off to Sansa Stark, giving the Lannisters a claim to Winterfell and blocking a Tyrell plot to marry Sansa to Willas Tyrell. He has the sword Ice reforged into 2 smaller Valyrian steel swords, one for Jaime and one for Joffrey. Marjorie is married to Joffrey, then engaged to Tommen. Oberyn Martell welcomed onto the small council. It is perhaps ironic that at this moment of the height of Lannister power, it is Tywin's children that frustrate his plans more than anyone else. Jaime gives away the Valyrian steel sword he has given and refuses his father's order to leave the Kingsguard and become Lord of Casterly Rock. Cersei accuses, then frames Tyrion for Joffrey's death, leading to the trial by combat and Tyrion being found guilty. Jaime releases him, then Tyrion kills Tywin. We don't know what Tywin would have done had he lived. Probably dealt more competently with the Iron Bank debt issue, kept the Tyrell alliance solid, and turned his attention to the other threats to Lannister rule, the Greyjoys, Stannis still, and in time young Griff and Dany. We probably catch a flavour of it when Kevan is briefly King's Regent, though one wonders whether eventually one of Tywin's enemies would have caught up with him. There are hints that the Red Viper was already poisoning him, and surely Varys would have tried to deal with him too. But of course, in the end, it was Tyrion. And we get one last insight into Tywin's character before he dies. Shay, the sex worker Tywin had banned Tyrion from bringing to King's Landing, was in Tywin's bed. The austere image Tywin presented to the world was not what he was really like. That, and Tywin's response to Tyrion asking about what his father had done to his other love many years earlier, were the trigger that finally pushed Tyrion over the edge. But if it hadn't been Tyrion, it surely would have been someone else. Tywin finally reached his goal of ultimate power in the Seven Kingdoms, but at what cost? He had no friends, just allies and family. And when they turned on him, it was over. Ultimately, Tywin was the victim of his own ruthlessness and double standards. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos like this, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.